Tower defense. A genre that is usually overstepped by huge RPGs and shooters, but is actually a part of most of the games that we play today. Integrated, you can see elements of tower defense has grown into a genre in itself as it rose over the course of the years and gaining a huge popularity boost in the 2000s, and then finally starting to become more devious and implemented in different 3D modules and usually a part of games in different aspects that we wouldn't even see today. This is the history of tower defense. What is tower defense? In order for us to understand this question, we must first look into what inspires tower defense. Like many of our games, such as shooters, RPGs, they're usually based upon some kind of real-time fiction, something that happened in real life. Tower defense spawns from the psychological fear of wanting to defend one's property or territory. We look at things like invasions and building huge castles and essentially towers in order to see the incoming waves of enemies, such as the medieval knights, the Lord of the Rings, and other fantasies in which you're defending a castle. And so tower defense really comes in the sense of wanting to defend from waves. That being said, the notion of what tower defense is, based on some definitions, is a subgenre of strategy video games where the goal is to defend a player's territories or possessions by obstructing the enemy attackers. This, however, being a subgenre which tower defense is usually associated with, is actually a falsity because tower defense is a genre in itself. Let's go ahead and take a look into what is the history of tower defense. The golden days, and the history of when tower defense first started. To look back, it's kind of like tracing back the human ancestry. The DNA of tower defense really started with Space Invaders in 1978. You have these waves of enemies coming on screen and you got this tiny defender that's defending the area. However, you could argue that there's no base to defend, which is why Missile Command, which comes next in 1980, is the closest thing as well, because you're literally defending the ground and towns against these incoming missiles. But the real reality in which the genre of tower defense, which a lot of people say was the first, is when Atari released Rampart in 1990. That was when the term tower defense really became the first official tower defense title. Rampart, combining a different puzzle enemies as well as shoot 'em up, was the first game in which you could place the objects and have them defend against waves of incoming enemies. These can be treated as the golden days of tower defense. Between Space Invaders, Missile Command, and Rampart, these are the three legends that led to the DNA of tower defense as we know it today. The early days of tower defense. Now, in order to understand truly how we got to tower defense today, we must look back at the early days. So after we got through, of course, the Space Invaders and the Missile Commands, there's a game in 1980 called Vermin on the Game & Watch. And if we use the definition of a tower defense as defending against incoming waves and hordes, this game had incoming moles in which you would pop them back down. In 1982, in Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, there's a defense-style game in which you're a snowspeeder defending against hordes of incoming AT-ATs. So we can see that the franchise use started to play into here. In 1984, there's a game called Pedro, in which you're defending a garden against giant ants, and you're kind of placing blocks to sort of trap them. But it was really in 1991 with Rampart, where there's castles versus ships. This game is the first introduction to auto fire towers and placements. Let's watch a little bit of the gameplay. And as you see, there's many elements that Rampart introduced as first parts that basically became the honing general of what a tower defense game would be like. Now, in 1994, in Final Fantasy VI, You can see versions of tower defense attributions, the placements against incoming waves of enemies during a certain part of the game, kind of like a minigame. In Final Fantasy VII, they upgraded that version in the defense against Condor, in which there was actual elements of placement and real-time combat, or real-time tower combat if you will. This marks a very big momentous moment for tower defense genre because we start to see that elements of it start to get attributed into different games. Games that, for example, Final Fantasy not being a typical tower defense or even an RTS, pulling elements into it. And we can see that this theme starts to go on in all of the games that we play today, such as waves and horde modes in some of our favorite first-person shooters today. Now, let's go back into like the 1997, in which Dungeon Keeper becomes a huge hit. The purpose of the game is to have a full core and defend it by setting traps and creating enemies against these incoming enemies that are trying to destroy your core. That is the core of what Dungeon Keeper is. No pun intended. Then we get Stronghold in 2001. The full concept of this game is a defense. It is an RTS game and is also a tower defense game. Literally, you're building towers and you're putting units on those towers to defend against incoming hordes of enemies. And the placement is freestyle. So if you look back into Rampart and you look into Stronghold, you can see how the two are basically the same DNA of tower defense structure. You can see the evolution of tower defense over the course of the years from 1980 all the way to 2001. Now let's look into what happened in the 2000s. In the 2000s, in order to understand what really made tower defense genre stand out as a standalone genre, you must understand where it kind of came from. In 1994, Warcraft came out, in which there were towers that were used in order to defend against incoming hordes in this RTS game. StarCraft in 1998 as well created different types of towers, such as photon cannons and missile cannons, in order to defend your turf while attacking other players using the infantry units. This led to a lot of, as well as their map creators, led to a lot of tower defense games and mods that ended up coming out of these games. Tower defense maps began to be built by the community in which tower defense was the sole focus and priority. Then everything began to change. Adobe Flash came out in the 1990s, which led to a lot of independent browser games starting to come out. Browsing community sites such as Congregate, Newsgrounds, AddictingDames.com, Miniclip, and Pogo started to release. And games were beginning to be played on browser. And specifically, tower defense started to become a huge genre hit. There's many games, too many games to cover that are tower defense games that came out during the Adobe Flash era, but here are top 5 based on 4K gameplay on YouTube. Bubble Tank's Tower, Gemcraft Chapter 0, Bloons TD3, Desktop Tower Defense 1.5, and Cursed Treasure. These are top 5 among this recommended gameplay person, among a bunch of other tower defense boom that came out and led to a huge boost in the genre of tower defense. In particular, one that will stand out among all history is Plants vs. Zombies in 2009. This lovely light-filled game, easy to look at, graphically pleasing, and as well as destroying zombies with plants and pea shooters, who wouldn't love this genre? And so this became a huge hit, especially during the smartphone era when, the iPhone and the Android started to come out. People wanted games to play on their phones. So Plants vs. Zombies took the cake in 2009. And in 2011, Kingdom Rush, a follow-up, a huge massive success as well, was a free browser game to start off with until it finally ported over to all of these smartphones as well. So this is kind of how we can see where the evolution of the 2000s, the timing of smartphones, Adobe Flash, indie game development, as well as the rawness of seeing RTS maps and the map editors to allow the community members to create their own maps. All of these became the reasons to why tower defense blew up in the 2000s, in particular around the 2007s and 2008 mark. This is when tower defense really became a solidified genre. In order to truly understand the evolution of tower defense, you must also take into consideration those games and developers which push the limits and boundaries of what tower defense is as a genre. First, in 2008, an honorable mention is Iron Grip Warlord. This game allowed you to take control of a character while you're also placing down towers and being able to switch to a top map to place strategically and see kind of where you're at in the battle. Iron Grip Warlords released in 2008. 2010, Dungeon Defenders, a huge hit for the tower defense genre. This game was very specific because it allowed you to choose a character, and based upon the character that you chose, those were unique towers that you could place down. The archer, the monk, paladin, and other characters, you would have to work as a team in multiplayer in order to have the full functionality of all of the towers as incoming hordes come on. This has also a little feelers of like the dungeon, dungeon keeper-esque vibe to it, defending a core. In 2011, Anomaly Warzone Earth, a top-down game, but also allows you to take control of a character and going around repairing, building towers, etc. as these global catastrophes are happening. In 2013, Sanctum Hybrid, a very cool game that combined the first-person shooter with the tower defense, something that isn't normally seen. These 4 games, Iron Grip, Dungeon Defenders, Anomaly, and Sanctum, are all very notable because they pushed the genre beyond what its typical Flash representation looks like, and can actually lead into some interesting future possibilities. Another 2 games that are more on the personal favorites of the list are RimWorld, which allows you to research traps and turrets and place them to defend against incoming hordes of enemies, as well as Total Warhammer 2, which is more similar to Stronghold Tower Defense, in which you have these siege battles and you have these towers that are defending against the incoming hordes of attackers. Though these games in themselves are not necessarily tower defense, you can see how tower defense has influenced a lot of different genres. These are 2 additional games that are noteworthy. Tower defense as a genre. Though by itself it may not be a major genre, you can see throughout all the course of the history and the evolution of tower defense just how it impacts all of the other genres together. The RPG games, the RTS games, the shooter games, all of them have elements of tower defense somewhere mixed into it. Especially anytime you think of a wave or a horde mode, just know that that came from some tower defense game. So looking all in all, tower defense as a genre has so much room for growth and development simply because it's flexible. There's so many ways that you can take tower defense. You can build up cities, you can combine it with other genres to create a cool, unique game. And these games are something that's interesting and a unique mix. Now, we may not see a AAA title that releases under these tower defense genres. However, in the indie field, there's many tower defense games that can be hybrids that will be coming out in the near future. And hopefully this genre continues to expand, but also remains unique to its own original DNA. My name is Leonice Brown-Young Jr., and this is the Tower Defense Documentary.